Hi, and welcome to the Esoteric Nomad podcast. I'm very lucky to be joined here today by Geraldine Orozco. I've been following Geraldine for several years now, and I'm always mind blown by the things she has to say. She has what seems to me, at least, to be encyclopedic knowledge about a lot of the unseen aspects of our universe. Things like the soul, the true nature of the unconscious, the more energetic aspects of trauma, and other things like the underlying structures of the universe. And yeah, I'm very excited to have her on this podcast so I could pick her brain about a lot of these things which I personally find to be extremely fascinating. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
That's amazing, Nathan. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Anyways, I guess we could start off super high level. Maybe you could explain what your story is. What were the steps that led you to awakening to the true state of the world and reality, whatever that true state means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my journey began really early on. I was born into a very spiritual family, and I was raised meditating, practicing, and having an inquisitive mind about different kinds of religions and spirituality. As a child, my parents explored different religions, and as a result of that, we became very curious, my brother and I, of these things, and began to do our own deep dive into them. But my real internal inquiry really began in 2006 when I had major life transformations happening, and a few years later, my partner passed away. And it made me wonder, how do we end up with these kinds of scenarios, these kinds of cycles of experiences in our lives? And, how do we contribute to that really? So I went into a very deep dive and began to observe my own emotional patterns, my own programming. And with months of meditation, meditating sometimes up to 9 hours a day, I really began to understand the core origin of my programming and the roots of my emotions. And this is where I began to ask larger questions. So the first questions were really about my emotions. Why do I feel this way? What's going on in my own process? And then it went deeper into, how is this adopted in my family? What about my ancestral lineage? Okay, well, how does the ancestral lineage get these kinds of ideas? How does our structure of our world um, is it designed in such a way that the most of us are having these kinds of emotional blockages in our lives and perceptions, very, very strong perceptions of reality. And that's really where it took me to this point in which I began to realize that there was way more beyond the structural social conditioning that we are, participating in. And the question is, who's running that? And what's behind that? And how did it come to be this way? And that's when the curtain started to open. And essentially on October of 2013, I had this incredible life-changing contact experience where a white light entered my room, and I was taken on board a craft, a lenticular craft of light with gray, tall beings about 7 foot tall. And they introduced me to my hybrid children that were a combination of my genetics and also these kinds of gray beings, reptilian, different kinds of species of beings. They looked alien, or I call it interdimensional rather than alien, and I can explain why. But that was a very, very shocking moment that began to recover massive amounts of memories that I had actually interacted with these children in previous events that I had not remembered, not in my regular life, but in other states. And I began to question those states of reality, and the experience that was happening to me in that moment. And these beings, as I became emotionally attached to the children and this maternal instinct took over, I thought I'm going to stay there with them. I'm going to raise them, all these earth ideas about what it means to parent a child. Of course, that's not what they were created for. And they decided to show me the matrix. I was taken to the Pleiades, to the planet Pleiades. And I had a very, very strong connection with the Pleiades since I was a child. That despite all of the learning and things that we were learning as a child, I would just pray to the Pleiades, to the constellation of the Seven Sisters, and plead mother of Aquarius, something like this. These are the words that I would use. I don't know where that came from. It was just something completely innate that I used to do. Um, Now I understand it, but back then, I didn't understand where I could have gotten that from. And so apparently I am Pleiadian, and I have fractals of myself that exist in the Pleiadian constellation in Alcyon and the planet Maya. And this is what they were showing me. They were showing me what I do, what I was doing there, and how it would play a role in my life now. And essentially, they downloaded to me and showed me how the structure of reality consists at the molecular level, and how everything has an oscillation to create a network of energy that interconnects all matter, all physical, non-physical beings. There's a thread that interconnects everything. And that's when for the first time in my life, I experienced peace, a peace that is just inconceivable to humanity, because it is a very expansive way of seeing yourself as all and nothing at the same time. And that was a powerful shift. As a result of this experience, I activated psychic abilities, and those psychic abilities were something that were so powerful that I could see a person's body. I could feel their organs. I could see their organs. I could see how information and emotions would process through energy and color and light, and just massive structures of light, every single human. And I would be able to hear what my neighbors were saying 3 houses down from my house. And it was just such a level of sensitivity that, I couldn't even leave my house for about 3 months. So it took me some time to kind of integrate that. And to me, that was the greatest proof of this kind of experience. And I began to question interdimensionality. What does it mean that we actually have these kinds of vivid experiences that change our biology, our physiology, our psychology in such a powerful way, and affects our lives? So this is kind of where it began. And, several years, 5 years after that occurred, I actually decided to change my life again, because I realized that living a dualistic life, hiding those experiences, was actually going against my growth. And so I dedicated my life to the work, and I became a clinical hypnotherapist. I had previous education of as a pranic healer, a quantum energy healer. I studied many things. But I decided to focus on DNA and the connection between healing and genetics. And that's where I decided to take my career into epigenetic psychotherapy. And that's where my main area of research is, and where I find connection between the interdimensional elements of humanity and then our spiritual evolution on Earth. So that's kind of a backstory.
Wow, that was an amazing story. Just off the bat, I have a lot of questions to ask you. But I guess one question that came to mind when you were discussing your story is, you mentioned that you had like fractal aspects of yourself in different parts of the universe, I suppose. Can you explain what you mean by fractal aspects? Is that like a fractal aspect of a soul? And does everyone have these fractal aspects?
Yeah, great question. So I guess to understand that a little better, we need to understand kind of nature of this reality. And it's a very complex topic that takes some time to unfold. But I will try to summarize it in the best way possible. This system in which we exist, that we see as reality, is solid matter, and humans that we interact with, it's very much a holographic construct. And there's a projection element from which humans play a massive role in what we are co-creating and experiencing individually and collectively. And that's a really huge statement, but there are many layers of information that helps us understand, that are both linked biologically, that are linked through physics, to the laws of physics of this dimension. And the structure of this reality is managed and sat on the foundation of the law of three, three, which represents the divine feminine, masculine, the integration of those two, from which the third is emerging. And so the law of three essentially pertains to understanding creation. It's all about creation. When these two unifying polarities integrate, they can create. And this entire universe that we exist in is kind of run by that law as a core foundation. So the holographic system in that case functions from that perspective. And for us, in order for us to create, to manifest our lives, to interact with one another, we function in this way. Now, another element of the law of three is that because of the way that the integration of these dualities function, the polarities work bioelectrically, this charge that occurs when these polarities interface. There is a spiral motion that is created, and that is on the basis of the Fibonacci sequence being one of the most important equations and really the secret of the architecture of all organisms in this universe. The way that energy is moving through those organisms is very much in a spiral-like motion. It's fractal-like spirals. So this universe functions in that way, and everything from the cells in our body to the way that birds are migrating, patterns of weather, the way humans migrate and connect with one another, the way that humanity is dispersed around the earth, even energy patterns, the chakra system of the earth or vortex systems of the earth and the vortex systems of our bodies are all based on this vortex format, because the vortex is essentially it's from where energy is emerging, and the way that our physical bodies function. Each one of us are infinite potential. Okay, so let's talk about source for a moment. We are all emerging from the source, and man was first created as an inquiry of separation from that source. So when it becomes separate from that source and it becomes individualized, this is when it begins to experience separation. That's the duality. Okay, so in this third dimension, it's about the reintegration of that duality as it returns back into that source. But how that manifests in the physical body is that infinite potential is self-organized. Okay, so that's one of the beautiful things about the spiral format of the law of three in this dimension, that everything is self-organizing. And that's very important to remember, because it has to do with our idea of fate. It has to do with our body, with the healing of our bodies. It has to do with how we interact with one another. Self-organizing systems are functioned by resonance, energy. So the human body organizes infinite potential through frequencies from the lowest density of the lowest first root chakra up into the highest. And we have 13 main dimensions that create the structure of this multidimensional body. And at night, when we're sleeping, when we're having these kinds of experiences that I shared with you, we are very much navigating those 13 dimensions. In fact, our past lives are within those 13 dimensions. Our genetic code and the information that we hold and inherited within us through the since the beginning of time in this dimension, all of that is programmed inside of our genetic code, and it's organized within these 13 dimensions as well. So, that being said, every single dimension that we have access through the vortex system of the chakras, through our genetic code. The genetic code is the blueprint from which is self-organized in the chakra system. The chakra system is a holographic projection of your DNA. And we are basically navigating through that. That is essentially, and so what that means essentially is that our fractals, because the way that this universe is created, fractal means self-similar copy of the same. And so the entire universe is literally inside every single human. The 13 dimensions of this construct is in a fractal form, but there are many, many, many infinite layers to that fractalization. In fact, when a human on Earth experiences severe trauma, for example, through sexual abuse, these are experiences of separation. And what happens when something becomes separate is that it splits. So what happens is that this soul, so the soul is essentially the refraction mechanism of that infinite potential in a dimension. And so what happens is that it becomes split into many, many aspects. And we see it as psychological elements of ourselves, but energetically, they are fractals of ourselves that exist within our field, and they also exist within different dimensions. So, for example, if we go into sleep, to sleep, into dream state, this is where we begin to, depending on our frequency, we can navigate into these alternate lives. This is also how hypnotherapy functions. So, in healing, in the kind of work that I do, DNA reprogramming, my job is to teach people how to reintegrate these fractals of themselves back into that what healing, that split that is occurring into one whole.
Wow, that's very interesting. It reminds me of what Rudolf Steiner said. He said something very similarly, where he said that once you get spiritually attuned well enough, you can actually maintain your consciousness during deep sleep. And it is during this deep sleep where your soul travels to these your soul basically has a life of its own, and you're completely unaware of this other life that your soul has until you can get your spirituality up to that level where you can maintain your consciousness in that state. And that's very similar to what you said. So I think that's very fascinating.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So one thing that came to mind when you were explaining that is, so how can one tell the difference between, let's say they have a dream, how can they tell if that dream is merely just subconscious noise versus you're being shown like another fractal aspect of yourself that you need to integrate, if I'm understanding you correctly?
Yeah, excellent question. So here's what happens. Every experience that we have, okay, so now because this is a holographic system, we also need to understand that our definition of dream, which means that something that we're kind of creating and experiencing that isn't necessarily rooted in solid matter of this reality, so to speak. Even this interaction we are having in a dream state. We are in a dreamlike state because we are in a holographic construct. Our frequencies are in resonance. That's why we can co-create this on a platform, and all of your viewers are in resonance with us. So that's why they will be attracted to this video. And so because of that law of resonance, essentially the way that a human is functioning with information.
I was asking what's the difference, or how can you tell the difference between what is just subconscious noise versus what is literally a fractal aspect of yourself that needs to be integrated while you're dreaming?
Exactly. My apologies. Yes. And so, so what happens in this holographic system essentially is that because of the fractals that are created as a result of our trauma, we are quite fractalized. Okay. And so in dream state, what happens is that because there's such a severe split between the true self or the observer and all of these different fractals of yourself, and then even the way that you perceive reality around you. I mean, most of us are sitting here and we don't really understand what is around us. We haven't checked into the way our back feels. We haven't checked into how it feels to sit on this chair. We haven't connected with our environment in the present moment. And that is the number one first step of how to, widen the split between yourself and your higher self. So while this happens, while we lack the cultivation of presence and reconnection with the higher self, what happens is that everything becomes very convoluted, very murky, very unclear, because we completely don't know ourselves. And we're basically like kind of barely making it through life. And everything that we do know is usually learned programs that are inherited ancestrally, and then of course taught through us. But even the teachers, even our teachers, parents, friends, families, our network, our community, they're also operating at the same resonance of our ancestral lineage. So there's kind of a limitation there in how much you're going to understand about your world around you and what is reality. So that limitation of perception is affecting also your dream state. It is mirrored into the dream state. It's bleeding into the dream state. And so our dreams become really, really convoluted, really abstract in such a way where most people think, oh, that's totally unimportant dream. Have no idea what that is. It's just random things. What happens with the human when they start waking up, when they start healing that gap and start reconnecting with the physical body and higher self, is that the integration process allows for clarity because things are coming into alignment. We become aligned with our emotions, we become aligned with our intentions, we become aligned with our environment. And that's where clarity emerges from that alignment. So dreams begin to become very clear. And actually, as all shamans in all the ancient cultures have discussed for centuries, it was the shaman always had to have a heightened level of lucidity and dream state. That was a direct result of a cultivated energy system. And when we cultivate the energy system is cultivated through the emotional body because we're bioelectrical beings. And so the cultivation of our emotions are essentially what will help strengthen the conductivity that we hold within the body. When our body is very little conductive, which again means completely disconnected from the body, no idea why we feel the way we do, just lash out and constant reaction to things, the way that you create is affected. You cannot create because you're a bioelectrical organism. The moment that it begins to integrate those emotions, thoughts, everything, now you are living from intention, and that intention is clarity. That intention is the ability to co-create. Now, to understand your intention is one of the most important things in this dimension. Because if you don't understand your intentions, you're not going to understand why things end up being wrong or causing suffering, to yourself or others. So it's the same thing in dream state. These laws, they all apply exactly to the dream state. And so what happens in dream state is that as you wake up conscious, the more lucid you become in your waking state, the more you wake up every morning, you remember yourself, even in this moment, you see where you are, you see how you're feeling, you see how you got here. That remembrance of yourself, that recollection, that recognition of yourself is essentially the gateway into many vortices and access points to yourself. You can begin to understand that you are actually surrounded by entities, surrounded by life. In this empty room, we are completely surrounded by beings, by energies, all of which are resonance, and they're also mirror reflections of myself in a fractal form. So life starts to make sense. So in the dream state, same thing. You begin to enter, how does dream work? Your brain waves change, and based on how high of a brain wave, frequency wave you can sustain with your organism as a result of conductivity, you now can travel into higher dimensional planes, which means that the beings that you interact with are going to be more intentional the higher you go, less parasitic the higher you go. Now, one of the forms of understanding parasitism in dream state is that there's always an uneven exchange, there's manipulation, there's confusion, okay? So people that are having dreams in which they have, they're seeing people or beings or being put into scenarios, but they can't quite understand how they got there or what's happening. A lot of times there's manipulation, because what happens is when we are unconscious, we are being parasitic, but we also become parasitized by other entities of a lesser and even sometimes higher consciousness, depending on their frequency. So this is something that we have to learn how to create energetic hygiene, psychic hygiene within ourselves by refining and coming into alignment and refining that intention of what we are, both in the waking state and dream state. And to answer your question, the navigation of our dreams is essentially, it's occurring in, so 2% of your DNA writes this physical protein. And the rest of that is what was called junk DNA. But within that junk DNA are the formulations that interconnect you to this entire universe. And it's something called the morphogenetic field. So when the morphogenetic field is your dimensional body made of chakras, the 13 main dimensional bodies of chakra systems. So you will navigate every night in your dream state up to the highest dimension that you're able to cultivate frequency in your body. Okay. And so that's why the highest evolved beings are usually the ones that can sustain a 0 point, because they are the ones that begin to travel in many dimensions simultaneously. And we exist in those dimensions. Just the way we are waking up consciousness in this world, we also wake up consciousness of ourselves in those other worlds when we enter into those worlds. Sometimes because we are fractalized, we see ourselves as another, and it's required for integration. Okay, so sometimes we have dreams of ourselves as being other beings. Sometimes we see other beings having their lives, but we keep going into seeing those lives in those dreams. Oftentimes, that's us. We're actually looking at ourselves. Okay, so, one thing about dreams is that we have to train discernment. And that's actually the most difficult part, because even in this waking state, many of us have a really hard time identifying and discerning even, who we interact with, who we partner with, who we get married to, where we live. All of those are a reflection of subconscious, unconscious states, and they manifest in the physical in this form.
Wow. That also resonates a lot with what Rudolf Steiner said, who very similarly said that when you're not very spiritually evolved, yeah, a lot of your dreams seem to not make a lot of sense. But like you said, as you increase spiritually, dreams slowly start to make more sense. He actually said that's like the first sign of awakening, is your dreams start to become more logical. So I think, yeah, what you said does resonate with a lot of the other things that I've been reading too, which is fascinating too.
Yeah.
So am I right then that the ease with which you could travel to these different fractal aspects of yourself is dependent on the electrical conductivity, I suppose, of your body, which is largely determined by the degree to which you've integrated your emotions? Is that correct?
Right. That's right. Integrated traumas are trauma basically. So let's define trauma. Trauma is essentially any time that from the file cabinet of known experiences, we can't find a match to the experience that's happening in that filing cabinet. Okay, so imagine that in your brain, you're collecting all kinds of experiences from the womb until now. Some people remember their past lives, so they do have that to pull from. But if we have an experience that is so shocking to the body, to the mind, from the blueprint of what is known to them in this lifetime, it creates a disassociation. It creates a split. And what happens in that moment is that energetically, this creates a suspension of frequency, because what happens when you go from a known event to an unknown event and don't know how to respond in that unknown event is that you drop in frequency. So the severe drop in frequency creates kind of like a blockage of energy in your field. And that becomes a reference point. So if you look at a body that is full of trauma, you're going to see all kinds of dark blockages in their bodies. And usually, in the brain, how this is seen, again, it's a fractal. So in the same way that our body holds these kinds of, stagnations of information, within the brain, we have neural pathways that become reinforced. And so those neural pathways are programming. Those programs we are repeating over and over and over again. We reinforce them. And soon enough, that turns into a program. A solidified program through a lifetime now becomes part of your genetic makeup. And essentially, you inherit this as trauma, individual trauma, ancestral trauma, collective trauma, then begins to pass down through the generations. So it's really interesting that, the trauma that is repeating in people's lives is something that is inherent to these localized experiences. And we draw from this ancestral database of information in order to repeat them if we are not conscious. So it's really important for the human to break those repetitive programs, those repetitive repetitions of emotional programming. So what is emotional programming? Um, our programming is made up of memorized muscle contractions, memorized nervous system, and biochemical reactions. So that's a really huge thing, right? Because we essentially become addicted, just like a drug addict becomes addicted to something, a substance. We become addicted to the chemicals. That's what drugs are. That's what sex is. That's what, the illusion of getting a dopamine hit whenever we, make money or something like this. Those are all these biochemical responses. And so to break emotions in the body would be to heal those addictions to those emotional biochemical systems. And what happens is that when we break those addictions, new neural pathways are being created, and we also learn how to regulate the nervous system and the biochemistry in the body. Most illness, most stress, most inflammation in the body is as a result of imbalanced states of these chemicals that are released in the body that create an imbalance in the body. So right there, you kind of begin to understand the system of healing and regeneration of the body and destruction. So when we go into patterns of self-destruction, these constant chemicals that create essentially illness eventually, when we sustain emotions in the body, they completely block the spin. Okay, so here's the other thing. I talked to you about bioelectrical, biochemical. Now, what happens when these stagnations of thoughts get stuck in the body? Those patterns over time, they block the runway of energy, natural runway through the body. Okay, so our bodies are made up of millions of vortices, micro vortices that literally make up this holographic bodies that we have. But the main system is made up of 7 main chakras in the body. And those 7 main chakras that are running the information, the holographic projection of your DNA, all your programming, all the systems to create this vessel, and then the systems that project into your everyday life. All of those things are participating in your ability to co-create. So when the body is in a constant state of repeating trauma over and over again, it can only move at a very certain speed of spinning. We are spinning essentially. So how do we spin? Everything in the universe, because of this spiral design that emerges from this fractal model of this holographic system, creates a toroidal system because it's polarity. These are two polarities of frequency. And so in the body, we are running that energy that creates this plus minus, this, alpha, omega in the body. And the way that we run the energies through the body is essentially speaks to the health of our conductivity. When we sustain heavy, what are low emotions like fear, anxiety, survival, the wavelength of that looks like this: extremely wide, extremely slow moving wavelengths. So when you have such slow moving wavelengths, your entire vortex system slows down. And eventually this leads to death. That is the destructive pattern of these emotions. The opposite of that would be to clear up the stagnant emotions, thoughts, and programs. And what happens is that immediately the frequency begins to change. The emotional patterns are changing. That's a direct result of this clearing of the body. And you can clear these blockages 2 ways: energetically, for example, in pranic healing, or when you are moving these blockages out of your way by cultivating your intuition to see them in your body. Okay. And the second way is going into the psychology and the subconscious mind, right? Because this is where you begin to understand, again, following the emotions back to the root core will help you, deprogram and dismantle those programs that were created. You also understand why they are created. And that's very important for people to experience and to understand how to do that. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. So you said one way to get rid of these blockages is to access what I would assume is like their subconscious to interact with their trauma in some way? Is this what you do when you do hypnotherapy?
Yes. And it's not even just hypnotherapy isn't required for this work. That's the thing that's really wonderful about this kind of work. In DNA reprogramming, we are completely conscious. Yes, I use hypnotic techniques, which is basically meditation, to help you quiet the mind in order to access your own truth, your authentic state, and be able to understand the emotions and patterns and observe them. Okay. All that we do is either in DNA reprogramming or hypnotherapy, we are deepening the observer. We are sustaining the observer in deeper states so that it can see levels of yourself. You can see the different levels of yourself. And that's really all it is. And first the human is going to interact with the emotions they dealt with yesterday, or last week or last month. But it's important to begin to see the patterns throughout your life. You might realize that you're running the pattern of helplessness all your life. Maybe that's a common theme since you were in your mother's womb. Maybe that's your mother's emotion, and maybe you took it on as yourself. And all of these events of emotions and programs, those are experiential agreements that we make. We make those experiential agreements with ourselves, and we make them with others. This is something that's done before your soul is even conceived. Okay, because again, the soul is attracted to an ancestral lineage based on resonance. So the soul that is looking to learn the lesson of this ancestral lineage is going to be attracted to be born in that family. And essentially, the job, this soul that comes in is biologically, bioelectrically, and etherically designed to transcend the entire ancestral lineage, not just that immediate family, the entire ancestral lineage. So that's how powerful the invitation is for souls that are born in this dimension. It's a very interesting arc of existence that we are experiencing.
Wow. So would you say that that's like the main reason we reincarnate into these specific bodies? Is it to heal our ancestral wounds in a way?
No, I wouldn't say that specifically. It is one of the outcomes that results from experiencing separation temporarily. Okay. So really what we're here doing is we're temporarily experiencing separation from the source. Now, how that is going to be experienced is essentially this whole selection process of the soul incarnating in this dimension. And remember that we also exist in millions, infinite number of dimensions simultaneously. So and why do I say that? Because a lot of people that wake up consciousness, they begin to recover their past lives. And that's actually very important for us to do. That once you have remembered yourself in your womb and you begin to recover the memories of your life, you're going to begin to recover memories of yourself as a child in the crib, memories that you didn't even know you had. Once you begin to lift the veil of yourself to yourself, now you begin to recover past lives. And essentially, these past lives are you navigating your DNA, your ancestral lineage, through your genetic information, through the portals of your own genetic code. And what you discover as you go down that rabbit hole is the immense, your infinitude, and how immense you are as a soul. So that process is the reunification of yourself. You begin to see yourself as one with everything. And that is really the whole human experience, is that we're experiencing separation temporarily because, we go through this amnesia point that we forget what we are, who we are. And then we have to go through all this life programming and suffering. And then we wake up again. And then, then now you remember that you're everything. And so the temporary experiences of suffering no longer are necessary to you to understand what you are or how to create. So if I were to surmise the reasons for this incarnation, one is reunification with the source, and two is to create. Because the creations, the way that we create, we're creating through the words that we speak, our intentions, our emotions. We create interdimensionally, such as in this hybridization program as an example, and we seed consciousness back into these dimensions. So in this matrix, we are seeding life. We don't know, we are not even aware of how we are seeding life, but everything we do is creating a new dimensional timeline that links back to this dimension. So, there's a certain level of responsibility that we have, and a lot of these advanced civilizations that many contactees are interacting with, they realize, the way that these civilizations exist, they are extremely harmoniously connected to themselves and to society and to nature. And the way that they exist is in harmony with everything because they have learned to transcend the limited illusions of the physical realm. So that's something that is an example for us that we are learning. We're remembering, really. We're not learning. We're just remembering that that's what we are.
I see. How would you say this relates to, I'm not sure if you're aware of Carl Jung's concept of individuation, which is undergoing the shadow work required to integrate the unconscious aspects of yourself. In what way does what you just said relate to that idea?
Well, I would have to research his work very in depth to tell you exactly if I think it's exactly like what I'm telling you. But from what I have read from Jung and studied from his work, it very much, it seems that he entered into the stream of consciousness of understanding that, there's this collective unconsciousness from which we pull from, we have access to, we pull from, and for looking at the holographic system of the body and holographic DNA, that's the morphogenetic field, and so when you are able to pull from these libraries and sources of information, you understand that, the physical body is not just the material. We are absolutely not material at all, not even in this dimension. And we know that. We know that our body, this, finger has more space than it does have any matter at all. So I believe that the individuation is very similar in this spiritual psychology. I would call it this etheric psychology of humanity, because the fractalization that occurs through trauma is literally an energetic split that becomes a library of information for the human. And the way that they integrate that is by healing the information. The breach of information from separation back into that unity consciousness. So unity consciousness is something that it's cultivated by the reintegration of yourself and all the fractals that have been created in this life, as I was described earlier, in early childhood, and then as you begin to recover your past lives, which is essentially the navigation of your dream state.
I see. I was wondering if you could go back to, you said something about hybrid programs or hybridization. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on that and your experiences with those programs.
Yeah. Okay. So let's explain, what is the hybridization program? The hybridization program is the creation of a soul as a result of the unification of interdimensional biology. Okay. And what do we mean by that? We mean pulling from the DNA of one organism and combining it with the DNA of another organism that is in another dimension. Now, hybridization also occurs terrestrially within our own species. And in fact, if we go back to the very origin of time, we can begin to see that genetically, the way that we have emerged on this planet, there is a major gap in evolution. And to explain that gap would be very difficult, take a long time. But we have a lot of very beautiful ancient texts that describes the connection of the union of the gods and man for centuries all around the world. Now, these are not just, in a way, this is both a metaphor, but also it's explaining how we have such a vast library of genetic information within us, accessible to us. it is recorded within our DNA, all of the interdimensional species that we have ever been and that we have access to based on our frequency. Now, in order to access other interdimensional beings, again, we have to be in resonance to them. And the resonance of our body is a vibrational emanation that is projected from our DNA and the programming which is in our DNA. So many contactees have had experiences with specific groups, like let's say the Pleiadians in my case, but when I began to revisit my past lives, I discovered that I've been all of these species. I've been Lyran, I've been Reptilian, Draconian, I've been these angelic beings, or Andromedas, you name it, every possible name that we know of and we don't know of. And there's a certain self-organization to these species as well by vibrational frequency. And in this universe, there are 13 main organizations of archetypes of potential experiences that we can have. We seem to be moving in and out of these 13 different archetypal splits of ourselves. And we do that through the interaction of these species that present themselves as whatever physical form. That really just speaks to the filters of perception that we've created collectively in order to translate the frequency that we're interacting with. Okay. And at the same time, that information is something that is encoded in our DNA. Okay. What do I mean? So, for example, for me, I've been connected with the Pleiades since I was a child, since I can remember. My most recent past lives were in the Pleiades, I would call them. And when I had this experience, I was taken to the Pleiades to visit these parts of myself that were coexisting simultaneously as themselves in the Pleiadian constellation. So again, the concept of time doesn't exist in the linear form in the way that we usually see things. It is a very spherical format. So the hybridization program is essentially taking the information that we have in our blueprint and connecting it with interdimensional cousins that are in resonance to ourselves. Usually, what is occurring in these states is the healing of levels of archetypal evolution that we're experiencing as a whole. Right now, some of us are born as Leos, Pisces, Aquarius, different constellation signs that we have created, but they are archetypally, they are frequencies. And we all fall in one of those categories based on the snapshot of the universe that was taken at the time of our conception. And if you think about that, the snapshot of the universe at the time of your conception is basically the code of your DNA, which is what we are processing. So our DNA essentially is holographically projecting all of these potential life. And the hybridization program is your agreement to create life based on all the lessons that you learned in all of your lives simultaneously, that you understand what you're creating and anchoring into dimensions. In this dimension, we have agreements to bring certain souls in. And I explained the resonance of the soul coming into an ancestral lineage. That is a hybridization program. There is an agreement between all of these souls in the ancestral lineage, as well as the ancestors and interdimensional cousins, brothers, sisters of these ancestral lineages. It's one pool of energy. How do I understand this? And it's the reason is this. I've been working with experiencers for the past, I think 11 years now, or 12 years now, or if not more. And what I've discovered is that contact experiences happen in pool and families, like ancestral lineages. It's not just one person in that lineage. Usually it's the father, the mother, the grandma, and usually there's stories from, centuries before. And so what that's telling us is that we have encoded within our subconscious, within our awareness, this interconnectivity with certain frequencies that we've been interacting with for millennia, perhaps. So we don't know the agreements that we've made previous to that when we've incarnated in other lifetimes. The hybridization program is essentially the refinement of our genetic code, bringing souls consciously and sometimes parasitically. We create souls as well, in order to experience again. Okay. So to create a soul consciously, the most highest creation of a soul is to create a soul through pure love and through the ability to embody the highest vibrational frequency of unconditional love, the highest vibrational frequency of integration in the 0 point possible. Only from that state emerges unconditional love. So when two humans unite at this vibrational state, what they create is just an organism of activation of DNA, higher faculties, because they are tapping in to the pure source of creation. And that is programmed into the DNA of the new soul. And that's what the hybridization program is about. We are creating souls with really high frequency beings, and we're also creating them with really low beings. It's also on the planet Earth with the partners that we're with. Even if it's a one-night stand, there is a very interesting self-organizing mechanism because nothing is random in this world. The connection and the attraction that we have to a person is purely based on resonance and memory. So when two people interact with each other, it's their responsibility as creators to begin to understand why they've been attracted to another. What is the purpose of their union, and what is it that they're going to create? Many times in the hybridization program, people are united with people from other parts of the world in order to create hybrids. And they don't realize the agreements that they have with one another until they go into hypnosis and they begin to recognize those people from past lives. They're like, oh, we've had past lives and we made an agreement to come and have a child again in this lifetime. And it isn't until they join a support group, for example, this has happened many times in my support group, where these two people from two parts of the world meet each other in the support group and they recognize each other from being on board craft or on board this experience. And oftentimes they are both introduced to the hybrid child. The hybrid child looks literally like them, like each of them individually, and a combination of another species it could be. Okay, so so essentially the hybridization program, even the species that's selected for the hybridization, tells us about the frequency of the union. The most primal species are draconian reptilian. Most of their hybridization programs are based on parasitism. They're based on fractalization of the soul. Why? Because they survive off the suffering and unconscious repetition of humanity in the reincarnation cycle. The higher the vibrational frequency of these beings, the more pure love. Now, one thing I will mention is that beings that are really, truly, truly of source, the embodiment of source, they will never interfere with you, ever. Okay? So a lot of people ask me if the hybridization program is parasitic. Are they doing it against our will? No, they're not. We are agreeing to these things, but the problem is that sometimes when we make agreements, we are at lower states of consciousness. And so the way that we agreed to create these children, we don't even realize. And then one time you have a dream and experience that you're presented to the child, you don't even know when you made it. It's because you've been sleeping most of your life, completely unconscious of what you're doing in your dream state. Now, also, these hybridization programs are not happening in this timeline. Sometimes they happen in other timelines. But people do claim to experience pregnancies, like what happened to me. I became pregnant when I was a virgin at the age of 16. And, I was raised in a very conservative Catholic family. My idea, I didn't even understand what sex was until the age of 18, really. But the way that my parents understood it were very much from the sacred union from the Gnostic church. Okay, so it took a long time for me to even understand what that was. So when I had this experience, I had all the physical symptoms of becoming pregnant for a couple of months, maybe up to 3 months, and then I had what felt like a miscarriage. But it's not that something is being eliminated, but that soul is already created. So um, this experience is used to create the soul. It is an intersection of the interdimensional with the physical. I felt it in the physical body, and I experienced these things in the physical body because my level of intuition that I was born with, my level of awareness that I was born with, and thousands of men and women around the world are becoming aware of these experiences. And they're intersections of our timeline with other timelines. So it's not something to fear, although there's very much a biophysical reaction to it. We have hormones that we're experiencing. There's often dread, fear around these things because, again, it's something that's completely unknown, but it's not something that hasn't happened. This is something that has been talked about since the origin of time. We can look at the divine conception of Jesus Christ and Mary. The white light comes down and all of a sudden Mary is pregnant. Okay, so we have to understand that when you elevate consciousness, you're going to become aware of things that in your mind, because of the programming that we have on Earth, because of our understanding of even sex, is completely inverted. We have no idea what that is. We are just learning. And sacred union, the integration of union is a direct result, directly results in creation. So every time that we become integrated in our body, we're giving birth to something. And the birth of that will be, different things. It can be, the words that you speak can be a project, world healing, there are many timelines that are created from our creations. So these little souls that are created are reinserted into the reincarnation cycle. And sometimes they are seeding life in other galaxies, in other dimensions. So you are completely interlinked through the children that you create interdimensionally. The power in the human is to become aware of what you are creating and why, in order to alchemize. Because another element of being a creator is that you are an alchemist. Because you are a conduit organism of creation, we have the ability of transmutation. The transmutational process is taking one form of energy into another form of energy. There's a lower to a higher point. There's an improvement. And that is what an alchemist is. So the education of alchemy, the education of transmutation is something that has been taught since the beginning of time, but severely taken out of mainstream of all educational formats in order to create severe confusion about the power of humanity. And so I think right now we're at a point where we're becoming aware of the hybridization program again, because we need to understand what it means for you to create. What does it mean for you to bring a life into this planet? And what are the implications of that? So I'll stop there.
Yeah, wow, that was a lot. Thank you for sharing. I was wondering, do you happen to have any idea how exactly you got physically pregnant? Like, did some higher dimensional beings beam down DNA inside of you or something?
Yeah. So I'll briefly explain some of the ways that this occurs. Again, this is occurring interdimensionally. Now, before I go into that, there are different kinds of hybridization programs. There are terrestrial programs as well. Now, the terrestrial programs are directly managed by these Draco-Reptilian races. They are feeding and informing the shadow governments of this planet, and directly related to bioengineering, biological warfare departments of our military. But these are shadow systems that are not something that are going to be publicly known. I was taken into an underground base in Colorado in 2017, and I became aware of cloning programs that the military has. These cloning programs that take your genetic information, they don't even need your egg, they don't need any of that. They can just do what they call a spinal tap to remove core information from your spinal cord. Okay. Because from that information, they can literally create an entire replica of you, an entire human. It is a genetic database. So this information, in order to create these kinds of clone scenarios, are something that are done by programs that they want to create a holographic replica of the Earth. And it's something that some people have talked about, but if we look back at some of the writings of Hitler, for example, in World War II, some of these programs, they started then. They started before that, but they really came into fruition after World War II. The concept that there is a race that is higher than the other is simply talking about the practice that has been practiced for centuries of preservation of bloodlines. And the preservation of bloodlines is essentially, when you preserve bloodlines within a certain group, you strengthen programs. You strengthen the presence of these bloodlines in the genetic pool, the collected pool. So that is a major manipulation when you begin to understand how that was done for centuries in all the higher groups of power and control, that 1%. Groups of control around the world, around the planet Earth through history. And the ones that have created, World War II, and then the many eugenics programs that resulted as a result of World War II never finished. Many of these programs have been carried out in secret throughout the world, creating sterilization programs in different gene pools around the world and things like this. Pretty severe manipulation, of information. So I don't think we've ever understood what that means. I mean, they did a gene sequencing, effort. But really, one of the biggest efforts of collecting data is companies like 23andMe, companies that, say they're going to send you your heritage. But in reality, this was a massive genetic database that was being created. And these are all interlinked to the manipulation of mankind through in every way that you can think of, really, because it's all there in your DNA. You can learn a person by just looking at their DNA. You understand their weaknesses and you understand their strengths. And those strengths are created through generations. So that is our terrestrial hybridization program. Now, again, genetic families that have preserved their bloodline with high vibration, such as Christic bloodlines, for example, or these monastic bloodlines, these bloodlines that have practiced more of these alchemical transmutational techniques have created mutations in the DNA for healing. And one of the blood types that is very interesting in our history is the Rh negative. The Rh negative blood type is something that cannot be traced to any other mutation in history. So there are many blood types, that mutations that have happened other than the Rh negative, and they're going to be emerging more in the future because of, as a direct result of the hybridization program. But the purpose of that is that when certain blood types, it's also about frequency. They have access to more memory. It tends to be that people with Rh negative tend to have more access to more memory at a very early age. They have more intuitive gifts and abilities. So this is part of that hybridization program. Okay, so the terrestrial program targets these high frequency bloodline families. And a lot of times they are brought into military groups. And we know this. We have a lot of really dark organizations that do child trafficking, sex trafficking in the planet Earth that are focused and dedicated to the collection of these children for the manipulation of their psychic abilities, for their abilities. Children are extremely open and psychic, and they can be utilized, in very powerful ways, such as these MK Ultra programs that have been running since the 50s, 40s even. So the terrestrial hybridization program is really all about the manipulation of information. Your DNA is a vortex to the universe. It is a portal to the universe. And because most of these dark programs are run by Draco reptilian races, they are the most primal manifestations of frequency in the 3D, right? In planet Earth. So there is kind of this exchange, this parasitic exchange of information between the lowest frequency and the mid-frequency species. So people that are involved in parasitic programs, most of their experiences are going to be traumatic. They're going to be sometimes violent even. A lot of people, most people that wake up consciousness in these hybridization programs, they do feel like they've been, had their boundaries crossed. But usually that usually changes when they begin to recover their memory as to how and why they participate in these kinds of programs. No human is a victim. It's just our level of consciousness and our ignorance of what we are. Now, the fact that we forget who we are. So the healing process from those is to integrate those fractals. And what happens is when they heal themselves, the children that are created for the means of a parasitic agenda are transforming as well into a higher octave intention. So everyone is moving to ascension. The higher frequency agendas usually are the ones that are seeding life into this organism. These are, again, created through pure love. People experience being on board craft, being made to mate, or being put in scenarios where there is divine love, and from there emerges this child. And it can be, biologically very physically done. It can also be, the lower programs are usually mechanically. Sometimes an egg is removed. The more interdimensional programs seem to either take an egg or, take the genetic data from the male. And then sometimes they are done in a petri dish. Sometimes it's reinserted back into the female for her to gestate. But the gestation process usually does not go beyond 3 months for most of these interdimensional births. So some women, for example, I was part of this documentary called Extraordinary the Seeding, and there was one woman who was in the film that was just unable to get pregnant until she had this experience. And next thing she knows, she's pregnant. Now, this child was carried to full term, and the child was born, and the child is born with incredible abilities. Okay. So it was incredible to see that. And then there's another story of a woman that, she was never with a man. She was a lesbian, and she becomes pregnant. And then she has a miscarriage, but she has these dreams of white lights coming to her, giving her the child, and then taking the child away. Okay, so these kinds of experiences are very common, and they happen to both men and women. And usually they end in a presentation. There will be some kind of presentation where the children are being introduced to the experiencer. And this is a very important thing because there is an imprint of information that occurs the moment that the person connects with the child, for evolution and for the opportunity to heal and to recover that memory. So those are some ways.
I see. Would you say that the majority of people who are participating in these programs are completely unaware that they're part of the program?
No, no. Some people are very very open and intuitive, and some people are invited to participate in the program. I wouldn't even say it's a program. It's really not a program. If you look at it from the bigger picture, it's the sustainability of this matrix, both physical in our frequency of reality and in other dimensions. So it's just part of it's just like the human organism has cells in the body that are constantly creating cells to regenerate parts of the body, exactly the same way how this hybridization is functioning. Now, the human unfortunately goes through a hypnosis at birth where they forget everything. So, what happens when they recover their memory is that these experiences are super shocking. Of course, again, because of our programming, we have no idea what we are, who we are, what we're capable of. So a lot of them can seem, very traumatic, and as if, they have no idea how they ended up in participating in that.
I see. I would like to go back a bit to when you mentioned Draco reptilians. I believe you said they're working with some parts of the shadow government. Do you think you could go a bit more detail into that? What exactly are the Draco reptilians, and what's their goal with humanity? And yeah, what exactly are they doing?
Yeah. Um, so the Draco reptilians are a species of beings that are more reptilian in form, um, up to draconian dragon descendants of even dinosaur-like beings on our planet. That's our history. Now, if we look at the world history, there is a lot of history of reptilian beings in this world, from the ancient Egyptians to the Mayans to the Incas to the Naga people to the Indians to the, even in ancient China, that talk about the dragon races. The original dragon race is the seeded life, again, to a hybridization program. See, these kinds of stories go all the way back since the very beginning of time. Okay. Now, biologically, we are descendants of these Draco races because in our own biology, we house the reptilian brain, the reptilian mechanism of our body, which is our most primal part of our survival mechanism. Okay. And so we have, and even the way that we gestate in the womb, we go through the process of these main genetic archetypes of creation of humanity as we've evolved with our interdimensional brothers and sisters. So the Draco reptilians are, again, the most primal. Now, the way that they structure their societies are based on military-like structures of control. That's how they exist. There's no such thing as families. There's no such things as lovers or anything like this. It is all about militaristic like models of organization of beings. Now, within the reptilians, there's a much wider range of frequency. So in the reptilians, there's a very low frequency and there's also really high frequency. But again, I want to mention that the beings that are really truly high frequency, they will never interfere with humans. Okay, so that means that they don't want any exchanges. We can connect to them like a higher self example, or a being of light that downloads information or gives us something without wanting something back, a kind of exchange that is expected. This is something that would be an example of a very high frequency interaction. The draconians are the complete opposite of that. Everything is about exchange, and rather it's extremely parasitic. So, in fact, I had an experience where I was taken on board a draconian craft, and the draconian craft functions. The entire craft is like a sphere, and it has a central tunnel system at the very center of the sphere, and it moves energy in a toroidal form, just the way our bodies and the way the earth moves. But the kind of energy that is moving through that toroidal form is, if you can imagine the most horrible things, the atrocities in our world, and you put them all together and create the substance of energy, that is what they thrive off. This energy center and system feeds them. they feed off of that energy. And it's not really to say that there's anything right or wrong with that, but it's one element of how energy moves in this universe. Because we are because we are descendants of these races, we have to understand that every single one of them has a certain percentage of this consciousness within us. Nobody is separate from that consciousness. It is our primal part of us. So depending on how we interact in our lives, the more that we integrate that part of us, the less we become parasitized by these entities and beings that are in our genetic code, and the less we unconsciously make agreements with them. Okay. So a lot of the way that they function is that the more the human is manipulated into states of unconsciousness, they get to enjoy surviving off your life force. So, and it's part of the parasitic model of the duality in this system. That's kind of what they're about.
Wow. So have these people, would you say they've infiltrated our political system?
Okay, yes. So, sorry. Yeah, because the model of their societies are based on military. Um, when militaristic consciousness entered into this earth, and it's done it many, many times because we have many civilizations that have existed on this planet. Every single time that we've gone through an evolutionary cycle, we begin at the most primal elements of humanity. So for that, we can just look at our own history. The very first time that militaries were put together in order to conquer and divide, historically, we've had that as a part of our consciousness. It's a reflection of the split that we're experiencing here in this dimension. So the matrix is essentially it's built on that because unfortunately, the matrix that has now developed into the societies that we participate in today, most of them are designed on the foundation that humans are survivors. They have to survive and to be alive. They have to survive to be healthy, to feed themselves, to have a home to live in, and to be joyful. So if you begin to look at that model of what is being fed to us by social media, by the media itself, and through social engineering, which is utilizing human psychology and inverting it completely to manipulate through the lower senses of the body. Your sex, your ability to feel safe, your ability to feel empowered, right? So when you don't know how to access those parts of yourself, you are manipulated. So the matrix, for most of us that still are coming from that level of consciousness, can very clearly see that most government systems are designed to capitalize on that. Okay. So unfortunately, this goes really deep and the history is there. It's in plain sight. You just have to take time to read and understand what's been happening for centuries. And the invitation in that case is that as soon as you wake up consciousness, that you begin to deprogram the survival elements of yourself in order to become a sovereign being that, can begin to access free will on some level. And we are only able to access free will when we come into a 0 point.
Okay, I was wondering if you could actually expand a bit more on that. Can you describe more what you mean by a 0 point? You described it a bit earlier in the context of unconditional love. Are they related to each other in some way?
Yeah. Well, okay. So the 0 point essentially would be the neutral observer that sits at the center of ourselves and observes through the 5 senses, the vessel that is engaging in this holographic system. Okay. So essentially, when we're disconnected from our body, that split that occurs, we're disconnected from the senses. And therefore, you have no idea who is really running the show. Actually, your senses, because they're in survival and unconscious, they're going to be running the show from an unconscious state. So again, that takes you into repeating patterns.
I see. So is the 0 point synonymous with just being in an awakened state and being aware of your reactions to things?
So the 0 point is the embodiment of the observer. And when we come into a state of pure observation, non-judgmental observation, from here emerges unconditional love. First, compassion, which is the unifying force that connects you with all things around you. And then from there emerges unconditional love. And biophysically, that creates energetically in the body something called the Merkaba.
Mm.
Yeah.
The Merkaba is, I believe I've seen some diagrams of it. It's like a triangle going upwards and then an upside down triangle. And I don't know if you subscribe to this idea. Some people believe that if you activate your Merkaba enough, you can actually fly. Would you say that this is accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, most of people that have experiences with orbs or see UFOs are looking at Merkabas because, UFOs are really organic technology, which are an extension of the navigators. And this is both for the parasitic groups and also the higher groups. They navigate their craft based on telepathy and their genetic information. So much like that, if you were to say in the most materialistic way, our physical bodies create vessels of navigation. And when we are able to spin our vortices in harmonious alignment, we are able to create the Merkaba, which is the ability to come into this incredible high vibrational frequency. That means that you cleared all the blockages from your body so that your vortex, the vortex points that are created by your energy centers moves really fast. And the way that looks is like a Merkaba. It's like two triangles. And so the creation of the Merkaba is essentially the cultivation of that is very much a bioelectrical architecture of our body that allows us to navigate all dimensions, as I mentioned earlier. It will regulate your nervous system, which allows you to regulate your brain waves, which in result allows you to navigate higher dimensions in dream state.
I see. So have you ever seen someone like fully activate their Merkaba to the point where they could like turn into an orb and start flying around? Or is this just something that's preserved for 1 in a million yogis that dedicate their lives to this kind of thing?
Well, you definitely have to dedicate your life to this because it's a state of being. It's a state of co-creation. But we are flying, if you want to use the word flying, we navigate every single night in your dream state. Your body turns into its Merkaba light body, and we are traveling. The thing is, how much control do you have over that? And how lucid are you in your navigations? That has everything to do with your ability to cultivate your awareness and your intuition.
I see. Okay, so I think we only have around like 10 minutes left. I was wondering if maybe now would be a good time to talk about you mentioned earlier how you brought up the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens in our timeline. I was wondering, were you kind of hinting at the fact that we were genetically engineered?
Yeah, but in a more organic way. I think that humanity has gone through many cycles of evolution, and in every one of those cycles, different genetic expressions were creating the forms of the humans that lived on this planet. And we are essentially a product of that evolution. We're a product of that evolution. And that evolutionary process does not just isolate the planet Earth. It's an interdependent, universal, multiversal evolution. So because the genetic code is linked with other solar systems, other universes, it's a network of information that creates life. So we are a product of the evolution of all of these archetypal organization or infinite potential in the 3-dimensional perspective. to best experience in this dimensional plane.
Okay, that a lot of that went over my head. I'm not going to lie, but
Okay, so just to make it really simple, I'm so sorry. To make it really simple, uh, so the human essentially, wait, narrow down your question again. Narrow down your question. Your question is, are we genetically engineered, right?
yeah, I was thinking along the lines of, how some people subscribe to the belief that the Anunnaki came down and engineered
Yeah.
monkeys. Yeah,
Okay. So yeah, that's one story. That's one story. And if you read the book of Enoch, for example, they describe that you read the Emerald Tablets, the story of Gilgamesh, and there's millions of stories through history that have depicted the same concept, that gods bred with humans. What I was shown is that three main bloodlines seeded life on this planet. Draco, reptilian kind of race, a Pleiadian race, and a Middle Earth race. Now, the combination of Earth genetics with these species is essentially, it's like red, green, and blue. Those are primal colors, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I was
I
just
don't know.
studying those colors recently, but so those primary colors are exactly the way that white light refracts, and they are the visible light spectrum that humans have on this planet. So in that is encoded our own creation of humanity, the evolution of humanity. From these three main bloodlines is created man. We have aspects of these Pleiadians, Draconians, and this Middle Earth race, and it makes up every part of our biology. And I believe that we are seeded from those races, and we are in an evolution. We are a product of that evolution.
I see.
Yeah.
Is what you're trying to say that everyone's genetics is basically a linear combination of these three root races?
Yeah, we're hybridized. We're hybridized from these races, but when I talk about these main three root races, from there emerged many races. Okay, so now we are way more, let's say, cosmopolitan, or more, even more interdimensional than when we started. That's how the DNA has it's been kind of watered down in a way, but also um, it's been fractalized, I would say, is a more appropriate term to use. But at the same time, it's been expanded. It's been multiplied because we're entering into a higher octave in the evolutionary state of the collective. Okay, so we're evolving, and every new octave of frequency that we reach as a collective activates more DNA, more memory is resurfacing to the organism. So that's why, in this Earth realm, we're all going to become aware of ourselves as all these alien species that we talk about. But we're going to go 60, 70 years from now, new races are going to come into the forefront because it's emerging from the dormant state of our DNA. And we are continuously being hybridized. So the new generation that is seeded into this planet, and we are very much participating in that hybridization program, is going to adjust to the collective frequency, which we are all evolving every new octave that we move forward in.
I see. Speaking of collective frequency, do you subscribe to the idea of there being some sort of ascension event taking place with an accompanying solar flash that's going to happen sometime in our lifetime? There's a lot of talk about this. I just wanted to ask your opinion.
I think it already happened. Okay, so the sun has been completely active over the past, I forget, 5-6 years. I forget how many years it's been already, but before that it was like dormant, for a long time, right? And if they had some events, it was far and few in between in some couple of years, but now it's like every day, every month, there's these incredible events. So we're already experiencing that. Now, I don't have time to explain what I would love to explain in depth, this concept, but the way that this solar system functions, that the sun is very important. The sun is kind of like the 0 point of this galaxy. The sun functions like an antenna, and it also functions like a system of a satellite of information that gives off information to the rest of the planets. So the sun is extremely important. It collects and it's constantly picking up information of this universe. And our DNA is directly connected to the sun. We come from the sun. We our entire genetic makeup, so the morphogenetic field, is informed by the information that is in the sun. And so anytime that the sun has major movements, there is a change to our genetic code. And what I mean by change, it's not like we're going to change the way that we look or in our physiology or biology in some way. Holographically, our genetic code becomes more active and more memory is available to the human race, because that's what it means for DNA to become active. Simply, it means that we recover memory or we uncover memory. So the more solar activity that we see in this planet, the more humans are going to remember, which just directly results in ascension, because our idea of ascension is a little bit limited in the way that it is. We are evolving all the time, always. We've never stopped evolving. We've never been unevolved. We are just moving through these higher octaves each time, which forces us to align with the frequency of the current time. And that's why we go through difficult times, changes, transmutations, limitations, suffering moments. So that's why the human has to be trying to move themselves into as much of a 0 point so that these shifts are really gentle, and they're not shaking you. And, the law of accident comes in and slaps you awake again because you fell asleep or you forgot yourself in some way. And that's what that's what humanity is experiencing on overdrive right now. Okay, so a lot of tough situations for a lot of humans that have been in deep sleep or have chosen to go back to sleep, because we have to align with the new wave of information that is entering. And so that's going to require a major readjustment of belief systems, paradigms, the way that we hold our bodies. A lot of things are changing.
I feel like I've seen some studies not too long ago that it showed that evolution isn't as random as scientists originally thought. And it's actually what they're beginning to think is that the sun actually plays a role in the direction evolution takes. And that aligns perfectly with what you've been saying. So
I want to see
think
that article. That's going to be...
I think it's so fascinating when like science starts to it starts to match what spiritual people have been saying for a very long time.
Exactly.
And I think we're reaching this point where people are starting to realize that what we've been taught for millions of years by these ancient spiritual teachers is actually true. It's not just a myth.
Yeah.
And I think it's super fascinating. Okay. I guess my last question, kind of a wild card question. What's your thoughts on Trump, and what's your thoughts on what his role is in regards to this new Earth?
So, my humble opinion about politics today, and I think you might kind of get an idea of what I might say based on what I've shared about the government and about these systems. Unfortunately, the way that these political systems are structured are really to feed into the capitalistic system, the monetary system, and to create consumers in a way that is creating a dependency for humanity. And that is really globally. It's a global structure of our reality. So, the opposite of that would be, for humanity to take back their power and sovereignty and no longer depend on governments for safety, for being fed, for having all the basic needs of humanity. Now, these presidential elections, unfortunately, are very much a business, and it's very much about who is going to run the business better. And so, in my humble opinion, the person that will go into the office will be the one that will run the United States as a well-run business. And that's not always in the benefit of the human. So, and of course, these also are connected with other, political relations with other countries that are also trying to run these agendas. But I will say that United States is no longer the power in the world right now. Okay, so we have to understand what that means for us, because a lot of things also going to be changing in that respect. In the countries that are coming into power right now, they're going to change the way that our lives are lived. So, when I think of Trump, I think that his political relationships are probably going to influence the direction that the country is going to take, our country's going to take. And we kind of have to prepare for that intuitively, understanding the intention of other countries and what they're hoping to achieve. The way to, and this is something that is part of this evolution right now, and what's going to happen in the next 3 to 7 years. And we have to really pay attention, because the 3 to 7 years are going to be really tough in major changes. It's also going to be really beautiful, because a lot of amazing discoveries are going to happen. A lot of things that you guys already know for a long time, you guys are going to have that confirmed in the natural elements of being human. But in physics and religion, those structures are going to be falling apart. And for a lot of these political systems, believe it or not, those were like the main controlling systems of this system of control. So as those begin to erode, humanity will feel kind of lost, like they have no one to guide them, no one to show them the way. And so this is where humanity needs to go inward. Okay. So yeah, that's really what I see. I don't have any specific opinion about Trump himself, other than this a little bit more generalized, because I'm a big picture person, and I really think it's important for us to understand the bigger picture and to understand distraction. Because another really important thing, part of this manipulation of keeping humanity in a dormant state, is to distract them in the illusion of separation, whether it's in political parties, whether it's in financial, economical, states. We need to move away from the ideas and perceptions of separation into unity. So there's no more picking teams other than the human race. That has to be the team that we're on. Because in the same way that they try to implement the New World Order, which already has been occurring, we have to create a new human race, this evolved human race. The human race has to come together. And this is where the 1% will no longer be able to manipulate from that perspective. That's important for each human to participate in this idea, hopefully. Yeah.
Wise words. Cool. I think that's all the questions that I had. Is there anything else you wanted to elaborate on?
No, I think we went really deep into a lot of these concepts, and I'm so grateful for you inviting me on. It's been a joy to speak with you, and hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, it's been super mind-blowing as always. Thank you so much for distilling your knowledge. I super appreciate it.
Thank you.
But yeah,
Thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you. Bye.